History does not merely unfold, it is created by what people seek. Events that reshape civilizations are often set in motion not by accidents, but by persistent acts of asking. For freedom, for justice, for leaders, for change. Societies, like individuals, organize themselves around longing, the intensity and direction of what people want, not simply what they endure, becomes the axis around which their destinies turn. Every public demonstration, revolutionary cry, prayer, and petition is evidence that asking itself is among the strongest forces in human life, able to pull possibilities out of uncertainty and transform them into new realities. But receiving what is wanted rarely brings simple satisfaction. The moment of fulfillment does not nullify the desire that caused it, nor does it relieve a society or person from the consequences of that desire. Instead, fulfillment acts as a turning point, not an ending, a passage into a changed world whose demands, ambiguities, and problems are now shaped by the very answer that was received. What seemed like the solution to lack may become the beginning of a different sort of struggle. Often, the wish that is finally granted reveals hidden dimensions of the original longing. It exposes vulnerabilities, reorders priorities, and sets off new waves of expectation or regret. This drama of asking, receiving, and living with the consequences raises urgent questions about freedom, agency, and responsibility. Are the fruits of our asking mainly determined by the nature of our longings, by the character and quality of what we hope for? Or are they subject to some higher logic, a providence that answers not just the letter of our wants but their deeper needs? These are not merely theoretical dilemmas. They govern the rise and fall of nations, the trajectories of individual lives, and the deep structure of spiritual history. Understanding how longing interacts with its own fulfillment is key to understanding how societies and souls evolve through crisis, breakthrough, and renewal. Nowhere is this pattern more vividly displayed than in the biblical story of Saul. The book of Samuel opens at a time of existential anxiety for Israel. The trusted leadership of Samuel is fading, his sons are corrupt, the tribal structure is drifting, and the people are haunted by vulnerability and disorder. The elders gather and deliver a fateful demand: appoint a king, that we also may be like all the nations. Their petition contains layers of meaning. It is outwardly political but also deeply psychological and spiritual. They yearn for sameness and legitimacy, wanting what they perceive other nations possess: unity under a visible, strong leader. In response, Samuel is grieved, but God reframes the situation for him with striking clarity. They have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them. The demand for a king is not a simple rejection of the old leadership, but an ambiguous turn away from Israel's distinctive vocation as a people ruled directly by God. Yet God chooses to accede to their plea, even as Samuel solemnly warns of what this new order will bring: taxes, military conscription, conscripted labor, loss of autonomy, and the emergence of unchecked authority. The people, however, are unmoved by these warnings. Their longing is too deep. The demand has crystallized and will not be withdrawn. This story is not just about institutional change. It is about what happens when a society's yearning becomes concrete and is matched by divine permission. The answer arrives in the form of a man whose very name, Saul, or Shaul, encodes the dynamic at work. He is the asked-for one, literally the embodiment of the collective desire. He is not a promised savior or prefigured hero, but, crucially, an answer to a particular kind of request. Saul stands at the threshold where longing is permitted to become reality, but his role is to fulfill the wish as it was uttered, with all its strengths and flaws. To really get to grips with Saul's story, we need to dig into its beginnings in the Hebrew language. You see, in ancient Hebrew, words are made from three-letter roots. Each letter is packed with meaning, often much more than just the sound it makes. The whole language is built on this idea that meaning is all about how things connect and follow patterns. In this world, names aren't just picked at random. They're full of importance, working as both a description and a hint at what's to come. A tooth for shin, showing force or a strong desire. An ox head for aleph, representing power and being the first leader. A peg for vav, meaning to connect or join things, and a shepherd's staff for lamed, standing for guiding, teaching, and showing the way. These picture ideas slowly turned into more abstract signs, but their powerful meaning stayed alive in both religious beliefs and the language itself. So, Saul's name is much more than just a label. It's like a tiny map of action and what happens because of it. When the Bible introduces someone with a name that comes straight from a main verb in the story, sha'al, which means to ask, it's telling the reader that this character's whole journey will show what that verb is all about. The shape of Saul's destiny, how he rose, his struggles, and his downfall, plays out as a living example of the root structure built right into who he is. This connection between language, names, and the story itself is very common in biblical tales, and for Saul, it's the main way to understand everything. What then do the letters of Shaul tell us in their sequence? Begin with Shin, the pictograph of teeth or flame. This is the force of appetite, ardor, intensity, sharpened need that chews at the heart of Israel's unrest. In a world where stability has vanished and the future is uncertain, Shin is the ignition of longing, the painful sense of something missing that cannot be placated or ignored. Desire in this form is both a fuel for action and a warning sign of instability. Next, Aleph stands for strength, origin, and the silent, ungraspable presence at the heart of all things. The divine, the primal, the foundational. It is the answer that precedes all questions, the possibility of breaking through from lack into new creation. In Saul's story, Aleph marks the turning point, the moment when longing ceases to be empty and becomes an addressable petition. It is, symbolically, God's willingness to respond, silently but decisively, to what has been asked. Vav is the conjunction, the peg that binds the immaterial to the real, that joins longing to its actualization. It is the moment when what was only felt or imagined now becomes present and unavoidable. A decision, a person, an institution. In Saul's story, this is where the asked for one is given, where the divine grant makes the request manifestly real. The sequence Shin, Aleph, Vav reconstructs in miniature the passage from crisis through appeal to manifestation, a chain reaction that is exact and inescapable in its logic. Finally, Lamed, the staff, indicates that what has been asked for is only the start of the next stage. The goad, the tool that prods sheep forward, stands for education, discomfort, and the necessary push that guides a people through consequence into learning. Saul's reign does not end with his enthronement. It becomes a vehicle for exposing deeper motives, for instruction, and sometimes regret. Lamed is not the finish line, but the invitation to the next leg of the journey, one shaped by the outcomes of fulfilled desire. Within the name Saul, the first triad of letters, Shin, Aleph, Vav, encapsulates the biblical drama of desire becoming reality. Shin pulses with urgent longing, the burning dissatisfaction and hope that drive the people to petition Samuel for a king. It is their crisis, not just administrative but existential, propelling energy outward and upward, demanding change at any cost. Their request is not simply a calculated move, it is the honest, aching admission of vulnerability. Aleph, in this movement, signals upward appeal. Shin's restlessness becomes directed prayer or protest, an act of reaching for something, someone capable of answering need. This is desire searching for its match, longing framed by both hope and presumption that the void can be filled, that authority can be conferred or granted from a higher source. Vav, the bridge, marks the mysterious moment when longing and answer touch. It is not a guarantee of satisfaction, but a binding of wish and world, an acceptance that carries a price. The king is not descended unbidden, he is given at the intersection of appetite and response. Saul arrives in history not as a divine initiative, but as the product of an exchange. What is asked for becomes concrete, with all attendant risks. This first triad is therefore an archetype. Every act of asking that crosses into fulfillment operates by its logic, unrelenting need, confrontation with the transcendent, followed by hard reality. In Saul's narrative, this pattern is literalized in flesh. The king is the substance of desire made visible. What once lived only in the fantasy of the people is now a fact, and the question shifts from whether longings will be met to what will follow from their actualization. If the first triad is about longing made manifest, the second, Aleph, Vav, Lamed, describes what begins as a result. Aleph stands at this new threshold as the origin of a changed order. But now something else is at stake. What happens when the granted wish plants itself in the ground of everyday life? It is no longer a theoretical answer, but a living reality, altering structures and relationships in ways not foreseen by those who asked. Vav persists as connection and channel, but now it underscores continuity and consequence. The answer is not a static object, but an ongoing influence, a king who must govern, a structure that must be upheld, a reality that must be lived with. The energy of the act of asking does not disappear. It mutates into a persistent shaping force, weaving the new presence ever deeper into the society's fabric. Lamed takes on its full force as instruction and discipline. The king is not simply a figurehead or symbol. His reign becomes the crucible where society is schooled, sometimes harshly, in the price of its demands. Saul's leadership exposes flaws not just in individuals, but in the fabric of desire, testing patience, hope, and loyalty, and showing the limits of what can be achieved by collective insistence alone. Initiation here means entering a season of not just fulfillment, but of consequence, and the possibility for growth or regret. The triad Aleph Vav Lamed therefore clarifies the next act in the pattern. What starts as a breakthrough soon becomes a lesson, a period of adjustment, and sometimes pain. The asked-for thing is not the end of longing, but the beginning of being changed by what was received. Saul's reign literally embodies this. He is the conduit through which Israel is forced to confront not just the satisfaction of its longing, but its unforeseen costs. When we step back to observe both triads in Saul's name, a complete cycle emerges, a cycle that structures biblical and human experience alike. The arc begins with profound need, rises to a plea for transformation, and is met with answer. That answer then spins forward, morphing into a new reality which must be navigated, absorbed, and ultimately, endured. Fulfillment's first taste is followed by instruction in its true price. In narrative terms, this is precisely the sequence Israel follows. The people's vulnerability and longing for order lead to a request for a king. God grants their longing, and Saul materializes as the asked-for one, making desire literal. But his reign quickly begins to teach, through its challenges, mistakes, and failures, what the consequences of that desire actually entail. Each stage of the arc brings its own lessons, often neither comfortable nor anticipated, always dense with transformation. These intertwined triads allow us to see biblical narrative as a patterned education in agency and consequence. Asking is never a neutral act. What is wanted shapes what is received, and what is received becomes the ground for further asking. The dynamic is recursive, not linear. Each round of fulfillment gives way to further need, reflection, and sometimes repentance. Saul, then, is not only a man or a king, but a living demonstration of this law. In his story, we see the template that all acts of wishing, granting, and reckoning will follow, in scripture, history, and our own lives alike. The logic and warning in Saul's story are not relics of ancient days. In our own time, the same dynamic has re-emerged with unsettling clarity. The rise of the Anon movement and the cult of Donald Trump follow the script of longing, manifestation, and hard education almost point for point. A society at loose ends, shaken by mistrust and loss of legitimacy, found itself gripped by a collective anxiety that begged for order, meaning, and decisive rescue. In this social void, prophetic voices emerged, inviting the aggrieved to see themselves within a mythic battle between good and evil, their hope fixated on the unveiling of hidden truth and the promise of dramatic deliverance. Q functioned as a digital prophet. His cryptic revelations did not just offer tantalizing secrets, they transformed a shapeless unease into a focused demand. The movement was told that the old order was irredeemably corrupt, that dark secrets would soon be exposed, and that a chosen leader, Trump, was divinely set apart as Redeemer-in-Chief. The longing was not merely for reform, but for total revelation, for a hero who would overthrow entrenched powers and restore a sense of primordial justice. Like the Israelites under Samuel, Q's followers were not only seeking protection, but legitimacy. The assurance that their way of life, their sense of self, could be shielded and vindicated by a strong, exceptional figure. In this context, Trump was not just nominated, he was anointed. Every setback he suffered only fed the narrative of chosenness. Every investigation became evidence of his special mission, every condemnation a sign of his prophetic status. The movement's appetite for certainty and dramatic reversal grew ever more insistent. It became its own generator of desire, reaching a fever pitch. As with Saul, what was eventually given, Trump's rise and consolidation of power, was not a random event. It was the precise manifestation, shaped by the movement's cumulative longing and mythic framework, of the very wish that had been articulated. The lead-up to this phenomenon was a period marked by cultural fragmentation and pervasive doubt. Years of political division, elite scandal, and institutional gridlock produced not just anger, but a hunger for clarity. The American public's ask was for something more than better policy or economic revival. It was a yearning for certitude, for a worldview in which all ambiguity would be destroyed by the exposure of evil and the vindication of the righteous. In the digital ferment of the late 2010s, this ask incubated a peculiar form. It desired apocalypse, not destruction, but unveiling. Q was perfectly attuned to supply the narrative infrastructure for this longing. By adopting oracular language and apocalyptic symbolism, he recast every event as evidence of a cosmic conflict. News cycles, court dramas, and political disputes became episodes in a single, divinely scripted struggle. Ordinary political actors became either valiant warriors or demonic opposition. Into this vortex, the longing for a hero became overwhelming. Foreign heads of state such as Putin or Orban were often cited by Q adherents as models of the decisive autocrat, figures imagined to have re-established traditional order, and who acted above the law on behalf of a nation wronged by corrupt elites. Trump thus entered the Q narrative as the focus and answer of a collective prayer. He was promoted not for policy consistency or administrative experience, but for being the vessel through which chaos might be vanquished and innocence restored. In this hothouse of hope, the line between prophecy and politics vanished. The leader demanded by the moment would inevitably be shaped by the anxieties, resentments, and mythic expectations projected onto him. The ask was not just for a change in leadership, but for the arrival of someone who could embody collective longing and enact the catharsis of national rebirth. When hope becomes that focused, the answer, when it finally comes, is never just an individual. It is a living archetype, a mirror for the movement itself. Through Q and an expanding network of amplifiers, Trump was recast as an almost mythic, almost messianic king. His every action, no matter how conflicted or self-serving, was interpreted through the lens of prophecy. The movement came to believe not only in Trump's political cause, but in Trump as a sacred agent, the asked for one whose very flaws were reframed as proof of his exceptional calling. This process did not unfold through ordinary campaigning or gradual coalition building. It was a digital awakening, a collective anointing, with its own hymns and pantheon of martyrs and foes. Every attack Trump endured only reaffirmed the belief that he was the singular vessel chosen for the job. His distinct lack of traditional political skills, his disregard for norms and processes, these became virtues, marking him as the true disruptor the hour required. Just as Saul's kingship confirmed the people's difference from their neighbors, Trump's elevation was cast as both protest against the establishment and fulfillment of the tribe's unique mission. Upon coming to power, Trump, and the movement that installed him, embodied every aspect of the ask. He offered strongman rhetoric, sweeping executive actions, pardons for supporters facing legal jeopardy, and disdain for compromise. His governing style was inseparable from the narrative projected onto him by his base. He could never be just a manager or problem solver, but had to fill the role of redeemer, breaker, and avenger. The structure of the triads from Saul's name returned. Longing became reality. Reality reshaped the community, and the answer itself quickly became the arena for the most brutal lessons. The pattern's next stage, foretold by Saul's story, cannot be evaded. The reality of governing proves far more difficult and less mythic than the narrative had allowed. Trump's administration quickly came to struggle with all the checks and balances, institutional inertia, and legal limits that no populist movement can simply wish away. Executive orders encounter judicial review, sweeping pledges meet international complexity, and the internal machinery of government resists easy transformation. The act of receiving what was asked for became the start of a new tribulation. With time, the dissonance between myth and reality grows unbridgeable. The movement that had called Trump into being begins to fracture, as hopes for sweeping revelation or the defeat of legendary corruption sputtered out. Promised mass arrests, and the storm never arrived. Instead, there were scandals, reversals, and high-profile betrayals. The much-anticipated reckoning with the Epstein scandal, central to the Q narrative, fades into ambiguity as the anointed leader quietly distances himself from the promised crusade. The cost of having one's desire fulfilled in the form of a powerful, unchecked king soon become obvious. Divisions deepen, institutions suffer, and national coherence is further eroded. This disappointment forces an education. The followers of the movement, like ancient Israel, cannot return to a state of innocence or pretend their longing had no consequences. Instead, they find themselves in a painful school, forced to confront the mixture of hope and naivety, projection and demand that had shaped their experience. Leadership chosen to reflect collective vulnerability reveals not only structural problems in society, but also the risks and tragic limits of seeking salvation in the image of our unchecked desire. Biblical narrative does not leave the people forever in failure. The story of Saul is not an argument against hope or leadership, but a call to trace the path through disappointment toward a deeper, truer answer. In the wake of collapse, when the cost of demanded fulfillment becomes too high to ignore, the groundwork is laid for new longing. Longing no longer fed by fear or insecurity, but transformed by hard experience into wisdom. This second longing is not for a magical or mythic redeemer, but for leadership refined by humility, tested by ordeal, and defined by justice for all. In Saul's wake comes David, not initially the obvious candidate, nor the people's initial favorite, but one whose legitimacy is proven over time, in the crucible of adversity, suffering, and faithfulness. David's leadership is not immune to error, but it is characterized by growth, the willingness to admit fault, and the pursuit of justice that transcends personal vendetta or tribal fervor. The Davidic hope, both biblical and modern, is the recognition that genuine renewal can only follow a season of disillusionment, a return to the slow, difficult work of building institutions, trust, and a communal spirit that values all rather than some. For those swept up in the Q movement, this pattern offers a map out of the wreckage. Disappointment, though bitter, is not the end but the beginning of a wiser civic hope. It provides the hard lessons necessary to ask better, to shape longings that are not fed by fear, but by an aspiration for the common good. In this way, followers can move from mythic yearning to more sustainable forms of leadership. Transparent, accountable, and grounded in the practical burdens and blessings of shared life. There is no shortcut around the process Saul's name encodes. When a society's longing solidifies into demand, the answer, when it arrives, will be shaped in its image, carrying all the virtues and defects of the original hope. If the longing is for heroic certainty, the leader that emerges may provide clarity, but at the cost of division and fragility. If followers demand prophecy from politics, they will learn the hard way that prophecy in politics never delivers pure joy. It brings consequences, disappointments, and often chaos. Yet in this ordeal lies the possibility of growth. The pain of disillusionment is, in fact, the beginning of wisdom. When the asked-for one fails to deliver what was hoped, the community is forced to go back to the source, to reconsider what it truly needs, how best to deepen its own maturity, and whom to trust with the sacred work of leadership. The cycle of Saul is, ultimately, the story of all political and religious life. Longing, fulfillment, collapse, reformation. Each loop offers the chance to ask better, to build better, and to resist the urge to turn every wish into a demand for absolute deliverance. The way forward is not through cynical abandonment of hope, but through the education found on the far side of disappointment. The story of Saul, and its reenactment in modern movements, warns us always to measure our desires, to recognize the cost in every manifestation, and to seek renewal not in fantasy but in disciplined, patient, and communal work. Growth comes not when our wishes are granted without remainder, but when, through the goad of consequence, our longings are purified, and we find ourselves ready, at last, not just for a new leader, but for the responsibilities of a restored people.